Kevin, welcome. So we get back to the in-person format, at least for our conversation. So Kevin, thanks for joining us today. And I will, before actually getting in one of those that I think are the most appealing aspects to me as a researcher, let's say, of the work of Cybernetica, I would like also to start with you basically giving to our viewers a perspective on what a private sector perspective, so the perspective of Cybernetica, on which is a company who also has worked on the most salient Estonian projects of digital transformation for the past 2 decades and even a bit more, considering how it was founded. So what are the building blocks, let's say, of eGovernance, in your opinion, from the perspective of Cybernetica?
All right, that's a wonderful question, and thanks a lot for having me here today. So in our view, what we've seen throughout several decades in working on e-governance projects, both in Estonia and internationally on almost all continents, is that in essence, what e-governance on a very functional or basic level is about is enabling services for citizens, because citizens are the end recipients of public services in large part. And the key enablers in that are, in our view, 2 pieces, which are one, digital identity, or to break it down, secure authentication and digital signatures. Because you need a way for people to access these digital services in a way that's secure, but also, provide measures of consent, like a signature that has legal meaning and says that I really want to perform this action or go through with this transaction. And the other aspect, or the other sort of key building block in our view, is interoperability and secure data exchange. So when we're talking about developing these services, building up business processes, you have a lot of independent organizations within public sector, and then you also have some engagement from the private sector. You need to maintain sort of their organizational independence, but also be able to exchange data between these organizations so that these services can be enabled. So in our view, these are the 2 core enablers in this bigger picture.
But this means, in any case, that, for example, let's focus on the on the topic of the data exchange. So it means that, in any case, you can start implementing and start exchanging data between different organizations, even, let's say, if there wasn't a coherent strategy to do so from the very beginning, but that you can also pool together and build connections between the different databases that have already been created individually, let's say, by the different organizations. How do you do this also, like at Cybernetica?
I think that's very correct to say that you don't have to have an all-encompassing strategy in place from day one when you start implementing things like interoperability and secure data exchange. In our view, we actually even recommend that you start it in a step-by-step or a phased approach, that you initially bring together some of the more forward-looking organizations and start building up these integrations and services between them. And based on this sort of ground layer of success, you can then expand the amount of organizations and different stakeholders. Because the truth is, the more stakeholders you involve in the beginning, the more complex and the more challenging the project becomes. And in our view, it even becomes, in some sense, impossible, or adding these sort of additional organizations can even be detrimental to the overall success and the future of these kinds of projects.
One question that encompasses, let's say, 2 potentially different responses from 2 different angles. What are the solutions and also the approaches, let's say, to data exchange that Cybernetica adopted and that Cybernetica also managed to deploy in other countries through the solutions that you have available? So what are these solutions and what is the approach behind them, basically?
Right, so today in terms of data exchange specifically, we have a solution called Unified Exchange Platform, and this is based on a distributed architecture. something that I mentioned earlier in terms of maintaining this kind of organizational independence between public sector stakeholders, but also in the private sector. So there are two perhaps key or core approaches to interoperability. One is a centralized one that typically is based on enterprise service bus type of solutions. And the other one is a more distributed one, which is sort of taking inspiration from the beginning of 2000s when the X-Road in Estonia was initially developed. So today we are heavily focusing on this sort of area in terms of distributed data exchange and interoperability, both in public sector, but also in enterprise use cases.
Okay, and the Unified Exchange platform in any case, even though it capitalizes, let's say, on the experience that Cybernetica already had with X-Road in Estonia, it's not the same as X-Road, which means that in any case, many things that are not just versions, but also other approaches have happened in between. And this change, as we said before, digital transformation is a permanent change. We're talking to Intel. Then it means that there is a research process and an analysis process at the basis of it. And this is, in my opinion, one of the most interesting aspects, let's say, as a researcher, of course, when talking about digital transformation. So how important is research and development in e-governance? Because Cybernetica can also, can be seen also like as one of the core businesses, also as a research and development company. And of course, that means that then we have not invented everything yet, let's say.
Absolutely, and that's a wonderful question. In some sense, R&D or research and development is core to us. We were founded initially in 1960 as the Institute of Cybernetics under the Estonian Academy of Sciences. So research and development is really close to our hearts. And throughout the years, we've maintained this aspect of Cybernetica. And today we have an in-house R&D institute or sort of research and development institute for information security that does a lot of work with different universities, both in Europe but also internationally, and also works on a lot of sort of groundbreaking research projects, for instance, with DARPA or the United States Air Force research labs. But what we've seen is that, as you said, we don't know today everything that's possible, really. But in order to be able to sort of innovate or bring out these new possibilities, you need to have a firm grasp of understanding or knowing what is possible today, or what is the existing sort of status quo, but also the existing best practice in different areas. Without this, you might be sort of redeveloping or sort of designing
the wheel.
Exactly, the wheel in that sense. And so what we've seen is that a lot of this groundbreaking research and development eventually ends up in the solutions and products that we work on and that we actually deliver to our customers, both in public sector and also in private sector.
But it also means, for a private company, let's say, to put the focus also on this aspect of research and development, it also means taking a risk in a way, right? Because you don't know exactly, you can, of course, based on the previous case studies, on the knowledge and the research that is already available, the literature, so-called, then you can draw a hypothesis, let's say, but they can be also just disputed, basically.
Absolutely. And I think it depends a lot on what kind of sort of horizon you're looking at in terms of time frame, right? Because certainly not all R&D is actionable in the first couple of years. Some of it takes longer because the market, for instance, might not be mature enough or might not be there today for those kinds of developments. We've seen this in a number of areas today already where actually we've developed products, but perhaps the underlying market is not there. But that doesn't mean that it's useless or that it's not relevant or it's not the right thing to do. It just means we need to educate the sort of clients more, and it takes a bit more time. And what we've seen also is that R&D for us is not only an area in terms of technology. So as we've from the early days been sort of pioneers in technology and researching really heavy areas in terms of cryptography, attack trees, in terms of internet voting, digital signatures, and so on. Today we're also expanding that R&D into more social sciences, political sciences, public administration, and so on, working more closely with different universities, because as certainly you've heard in this conference and earlier before, it's not just about technology. And also, we don't want to sort of trivialize the aspect of technology, because that is a very core piece of e-governance, but also the sort of aspect of legal framework, processes, organizational design, relationships between stakeholders. This all comes together and is relevant in successful implementations of e-governance.
Yeah, technology, because e-governance is indeed technology and everything around it.
Absolutely.
Or maybe technology is even like one part of that around that is that indeed basically makes the framework for successful e-governance to happen. And Kevin, I would ask you also something on the partnerships and on your international projects, because indeed. Yes, Cybernetica, a company that has a long history in Estonia, that has like the roots here, but that today, in any case, is involved in projects worldwide. So, for what concerns the building blocks of e-governance, how do your partnerships, let's say, look like? Let's say with either public or private sector organizations.
That's a good question, and. So in our international work, we have a diverse sort of pool of different partners, and that looks at both the technology side, but also the legal side, organizational side, change management, and so on. So in that sense, we work with significant international or sort of global players in terms of the Big Four in consulting, as an example. But in large part, it's also always very important for us to have a direct relationship with the end customer, with the government itself that we're implementing with, and also with the local private sector within that country. Because our sort of philosophy in large part is that the government should eventually be able to achieve independence in managing and operating these kinds of solutions. And the local private sector in that sense is instrumental. And also the case is that we don't have all the understandings of the local culture, the local characteristics, because that is always unique in every place. I'd say in some sense, areas of technology and sort of best practices and principles of information security, as an example, are universal around the world in some sense. But the political landscape, the legal frameworks, the people in those countries, that's always unique, and that's where we definitely rely on our partners.
Perfect, Kevin. Thanks a lot for joining us today. And of course, I'll remind the viewers that Cybernetica too has their own booth in the expo area. Are you going to be there? There is an open discussion coming up at 2:30 Estonian time,
That's right. My partner, Max, is there at the moment.
Perfect. Okay, then head there at 2:30 p.m. Estonian time for seeing the open discussion that they will have. And I thank Kevin once again.